Sabres file for arbitration with Bowen Byram. Conor Timmins files for arbitration with them. The implications of both, especially with Byram, coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody, and welcome into this edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on our YouTube channel. Be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you are watching along. And as always, you could be a part of our Locked On Sabres text club by heading over to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Sabres. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Wednesday. The Sabres making a couple of moves over the last couple of days with their restricted free agents today. We'll break down one by one the three remaining RFAs of note for the Sabres, two of which have filed for arbitration in Bowen Byram, and then also Conor Timmins. The Sabres filed for arbitration with Byram. Timmins did with the Sabres, and then Devin Levi is sitting there right now as an RFA as well. Alex Lyon had some comments yesterday, meeting with the media, that have me thinking about Levi a little bit more, in a crazy poll from a couple years ago that I found from my Twitter. So, lot to get to on today's show as we continue to wait for a Byram trade. That really is the game right now. Following the Sabres and being a Sabre fan right now is looking at your watch and just waiting as the seconds tick off when we are going to get a Byram trade, assuming we do, or resolution on the contract. Now, the Sabres making this move, I do like what they did here. I think you're seeing a lot of people talk about the downside of this contract with the Sabres, but to me, I don't really see any downside for the Buffalo Sabres, assuming they do not want a long-term contract with the player, which I don't believe they do, and I don't think anybody else believes that they do right now. So I'll explain why I don't really think there's any downside to what the Buffalo Sabres really did here by filing for arbitration. So when they do that, they are really, what they are accomplishing, in my mind, and by the rules, is they are eliminating any possibility of an offer sheet from another team. And there were rumors, there were reports that another team had been looking at Byram and considering the possibility of an offer sheet. Well, that never came to fruition, but maybe in part because the Sabres got ahead of it and said, well, if we can't find a trade and this offer sheet threat is out there, similar to with Carolina and the New York Rangers. The Hurricanes had threatened the Rangers with an offer sheet of Keandre Miller, kind of pushing the Rangers into a trade, and they figured out a trade sending Miller to Carolina. The Sabres did not get backed into that corner. Instead, they waited and were able to get through to this past weekend without anyone offer sheeting Byram, because then they're able to file for arbitration. And what that does for the Sabres is it does get rid of the possibility of an offer sheet. Nobody can do it now. Nobody can offer sheet Bowen Byram. That is done the moment you file for arbitration. So that is a point of leverage that Byram and his agent would have had. That is also a point of leverage that other teams would have had over the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres get rid of both of those layers of leverage with this one single move. The downside being described as, well, what you're doing now, though, is walking him to unrestricted free agency because he has 2 years left. And when you file for arbitration, the player gets to decide the term. He gets to decide if it's a 1 year deal or if it's a 2-year deal. And everyone's like, well, Byram now can file for a 2-year deal, and then the arbitrator decides the money. That walks him to unrestricted free agency. But listen, the Sabres, I don't think, have any intent in the first place on letting it get that far. The odds of Bowen Byram still being on the roster in July of 2027 when he would be eligible to become an unrestricted free agent for the first time, to me, are slim to none. The Sabres are going to trade this player one way or another at some point in time. The only question is when. Will it happen now? Will it happen next month? Will it happen in the fall? Will it happen at the trade deadline? Or will it happen next year in the summer before the draft at free agency? How about the trade deadline after that? The Sabres have like 5 different opportunities to trade the player before they would lose him for nothing. They've got a lot of time here, and I don't think they have to worry about walking a player to UFA status that they are intent on trading. If they were intent on paying the guy a long-term deal, well, then I would understand why this is maybe not the smartest move. But they don't want to keep the player long-term. If Byram comes out this year and he's dominant and he is a top pair defenseman, even without Dahlin, he's thriving without Dahlin, he's putting up points and it looks undeniable. The numbers look good. The advanced numbers look good and everything is like, oh, Bo Byram's finally figured it out. He's not just a good defenseman with Rasmus Dahlin. He's like a top defenseman in the NHL. If he does that, then you might have a situation on your hands. But I don't tend to think that Byram has that in him. I think that with Dahlin, he might be able to do something like that, but without Dahlin, he will not. And for me, that kind of just right there is already the thing we know about Bo Byram. So I don't really think that there is downside to this. We don't know when exactly he's going to be meeting with the arbitrator, when the Sabres will as well. That should happen at the end of July or at the beginning of August. So my expectation is that Byram will get a pretty healthy number, somewhere in the 6 to 7 range would be my guess. I also don't want to assume everyone flipping out about, wow, 2-year deal, he could walk to on UFA status. I'm not sure he will do that. Because if Byram thinks he's getting traded and he's open to signing a long-term deal with whoever his next team is, say that's Calgary. Calgary is rumored to be interested in their Western Canada around where Byram is from. Byram's from the Vancouver area, so you're a lot closer to home in Calgary. They have Mackenzie Weegar there, who is a great defenseman, but if he's looking for that power play role, that top 2 defenseman role, I think he's got that sitting there for him in Calgary. It depends if they would see him as being their number 1 power play defenseman over Mackenzie Weegar, and if they would be willing to move off of Rasmus Andersson, which more and more it sounds like they are trying to move Rasmus Andersson. So that would be a good spot for him. Well, if he agrees and likes the idea of staying there long term, if he signs a 2-year deal, he's not eligible to sign an extension for another year. Whereas if he were to do the 1-year deal in arbitration and then the Sabres trade him, he would be, I believe, eligible to sign an extension right away with the opposing team. But I would bet that both sides would like to have this done before they reach arbitration. I would predict that the trade does come before that last week of July. So I think in the next 2 weeks, we are going to have a deal for Byram to somewhere. And right now I would bet on Calgary. There was a St. Louis rumor the other day. Problem now with the Blues as a team, if you're looking at what they have to offer, I want Jordan Kyrou. And the problem is his trade protection, no movement clause, kicked in on July 1st, so you waited too long. You could have maybe got that done before that happened. I mean, you could try to get him to waive his no movement clause, but I don't know how likely you are to get that. Jake Neighbors is another player that I see referenced a lot. 23-year-old winger, left winger that could replace JJ Peterka. He has scored 49 goals in the last 2 years, which is very similar to Peterka. Was a late first-round pick in 2020. So Jake Neighbors is an idea for Bo Byram. On the Calgary side of things, I saw Rasmus Andersson trade rumors. I don't think you want to do that in exchange for Byram. I think you'll be looking for a scoring winger, not an expiring contract defenseman. Connor Zary is a name there in Calgary that comes up a lot. Zary, though, only 27 goals in his last 2 seasons combined. but he's still a young player, 23 years old, was a first-round pick. He actually went 2 picks before Jake Neighbors of St. Louis. And there is, I think, a good reason to believe that he's got more in him offensively. I would predict that he has more in him offensively if you just look at some of the numbers. Beyond that, the problem with Calgary is old, and they've got a lot of players with trade protection. Like Nazem Kadri would be a very intriguing name to talk about because he is older, 34 years old, and still very productive. 35 goals last season for the Calgary Flames. He's got that tough to play against part of his game that the Sabres, of course, are looking for right now. But Kadri has a full no movement clause. Next year, he has a 13-team no trade list. But for now, Kadri would have to be all in on joining you if you were going to get him back in a deal. Joel Farabee, formerly of the Flyers, we had talked about him when he was in Philadelphia, is there in Calgary, and he has no trade protection, but they just acquired him. So I don't know why they would be ready to spin him that quickly. They got him at the deadline, I think. 31 games last year, only 6 points, by the way, for Calgary. So it didn't go particularly well when he got there. Maybe they'd be looking to dump him this quickly after that, but there's really not. Oh, the one other name. Sorry, one other name that I did want to mention from Calgary, if that were to be the team, is Morgan Frost. Morgan Frost, also formerly of the Philadelphia Flyers, also a player that I've talked about in this show going back probably about a year, little more, maybe more than a year. He had 12 points in 32 games after getting dealt to Calgary last year. And he's a center, so he could either move to the wing or somebody else could move to the wing. He's a player I've liked since the beginning of his career. It hasn't really all come together for him, just statistically. So that's been a little bit of a letdown. He's put up 40 points twice. I think last year he only put up 37. So you would want a little bit more out of him. But I still feel like there's a good player in there. He's 26. That's the problem. You kind of feel like there's not much more upside. Like this is it. This is who he is. But I think he's a pretty good player. So Frost and stuff could be a part of it. There's not a ton exciting about the Calgary offer. Matt Coronado, one other name. I think I like the idea of the St. Louis trade more. And Jake Neighbors would be the name that I would be looking at if I were the Buffalo Sabres. When we come back, Devin Levi's an RFA. Any drama on that front? There might be. That when we come back. Today's episode presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing. Was just watching Djokovic win at the quarterfinals in Wimbledon. We got a lot of good Wimbledon right now. And whether you're all about Wimbledon or baseball under the lights, golf, high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. I mean, why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you could get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I am loving right now looking at some of these favorites at Wimbledon. I've been kind of parlaying together a couple of different favorites all together to kind of get those odds down. And I've seen really good results on that so far. It's not necessarily fun to root against the underdog at all times, but it's tennis. We like rooting for the big names anyway. So whether it's a same game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're a part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5, get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Some RFA chatter with the Sabres. They still have 3 big contracts to do. Really, I mean, it's one big contract and then 2 smaller deals with Devon Levi and Conor Timmins. Sabres, by the way, let me look in their depths of their organization. They don't even really have an RFA. They have a couple of UFA guys in Rochester, but nobody else that's a restricted free agent at the prospect level. When it comes to Devin Levi, I was talking about Devin Levi this morning on my show on WGR Sports Radio 550, and he came up because I found an old poll that I had posted on Twitter in June of 2023. So this is right after the Sabres missed the playoffs by 1 point, and Devin Levi had showed up for 7 games, looked great, and everybody believed that he was going to ride into the season as their starting goalie, which, by the way, he did. He started night one in the first couple of games for the Sabres that year. And I asked the question on June 8th of 2023 at 6:26 in the morning. Would you trade Devin Levi straight up for Connor Hellebuyck on a long-term extension? And out of 8,800 votes, 86.6% said no, that they would not do that. It's looking back, hindsight's 2020. It's an incredible poll to look back at and see the results of, because it tells the story of two different things. One, how confident we were the Sabres were on the right track. Two, how much hype there was about Devin Levi and how good we really thought he was going to be. And three, I guess Hellebuyck. Hellebuyck, though, is the best goalie in the world, and he was going in the final year of his deal. But even for the question, I gave you the long-term extension, and 86.6% still said no to that. So, yes, looking back, it almost seems idiotic to think that anybody ever would have passed on the best goalie in the world for Devin Levi, who, listen, that's the question right now. This is why I kind of bring it up, because Levi needs a contract. And there's two parts of me right now thinking about Levi, two different layers of conversation. One is what his trajectory is right now, how likely he still is to reach the hype, the profile that we once thought of him for, and maybe still do. And two, how does he think of this whole contract situation? I'm not sure he's earned this, which is why his feelings could be a lot different. But the worst kept secret during that spring run in 2023, when the Sabres are in the playoff race, and it is evident they just need saves. Craig Anderson is limping around at 40 years old. He's trying to play games for them, but he doesn't really have the body to play more than one game a week. And the combination of Luukkonen and Comrie was really letting them down. They needed a goalie. They needed to acquire a goalie at the deadline that could play games for them down the stretch. And they did not do it, with a huge reason being that they were afraid that if they traded for a goaltender, that it was going to sway Devin Levi to return to school, play out his college career, and end up going somewhere else in unrestricted free agency at the end of his college career. That was the fear. So they didn't do it. They didn't acquire a goalie. Levi showed up, but by then it was too late. They missed the playoffs. And to me, it's one of the biggest mistakes that any Sabres GM has made in the whole drought, is Kevin Adams that spring deciding not to acquire a goaltender. That was a playoff team that just needed a few more saves, and they would have been in the playoffs, and the drought would be over. But instead, they were afraid of losing their college goaltender. And I get it. He had a great career. He was playing at a historically great level. The Sabres believed, and I think looking back now, this part was wrong. He could still be a great goaltender. They believed he was different. They believed he was special in his timeline. Most goaltenders, almost all goaltenders ever, do not arrive as day-to-day NHL goaltenders, especially starters, until they are 24, 25, 26 years old sometimes. Levi was 21 when they were going through that. It was always unlikely that he was going to be able to arrive and be that good that quickly. Now, I've got a goalie that is, for 3 seasons now, the Sabres have built their net around Levi. That year they missed the playoffs by 1 point. They didn't add to it because they knew he was coming. The next year, he's their starter. He walks into the season as their starting goaltender, right? Night one. And they end up lucking into a good Luukkonen season because, remember, Comrie was the number 2. He got the next crack at it when Levi got injured early on, and then it was Luukkonen. So they luck into Luukkonen. Levi goes down. But they had built their net around Levi that season. Last year, they kind of built their net around Levi being the number 2. behind Luukkonen. That's how the season began. The Sabres even waived James Reimer. Remember that? They waived James Reimer. They were lucky to get him back because the Ducks had replaced him on waivers weeks later. Sabres reacquire him, and then they end up sending Levi down after that happened. Now, maybe they acquire a goalie anyway, but there was that beginning of the last season, they thought Levi was going to be the 1B to Luukkonen. Only this year have they finally thrown a roadblock in front of Devin Levi, like a real true roadblock, because they waived Reimer and Eric Comrie wasn't like a real roadblock. This is a roadblock, and with Alex Lyon, who spoke to the media yesterday, had some good comments about how maybe in the past he always hasn't been great to his goalie partner in the room because he's competing with that guy, right? He's competing for starts, competing for minutes, and now he's taking more of an approach of, maybe he started doing this last year, an approach of everybody's got to support everybody in that room as a unit. So when Lyon says that, I'm thinking about Levi, but I'm also thinking about Lyon just being here, because Lyon on a 2-year deal, I think is right now the best goalie that they have. So Luukkonen's paid $2. There's a block in front of Levi. I don't think he has earned this right to flex any muscles in his contract negotiations with the Sabres and try to get somewhere that would give him an NHL job right now. Because again, I don't really think he has earned an NHL job right now. But I do wonder if he's thinking about it. Because if 3 years ago he was already thinking, I only want to sign in Buffalo if I've got a clear path to the NHL. And if they don't have that, I'll go develop in someone else's system. Does he have the same attitude right now? Is he thinking, I hope not, because I still think he's going to become a good NHL goaltender. I really do. But I'm not sure about it. Does he think right now, if I'm going to be back in the AHL, and if it's not going to be made easy for me in Buffalo to be in the NHL, then I would like to go play in a different system? Because I kind of feel like that's what would have happened had they taken that approach with him a couple years back. But the problem for him on that, and this is why I don't really think he'll go down that road, is I don't know what kind of leverage he has. I don't think he has really much of a leg to stand on. He is waivers exempt because of the number of games he's played. Sorry, not waivers exempt. I believe he is offer sheet exempt. So either way, restricted free agent. Maybe he can be offer sheeted. I'm not sure. I thought I saw the other day that he's not arbitration eligible. Maybe that's all it is. So he can't file for arbitration. I don't know if he could be offer sheeted. Maybe a team would come calling with that wants to make him their number 2 goalie and try to poach him from the Buffalo Sabres. But to me, Levi, I'd love to see him to show up at camp and kind of earn a spot, and then the Sabres maybe move off of Luukkonen. I would love to see that happen. And then play well in the regular season. But I don't think the Sabres can wait around any longer for Devin Levi. And I'm glad to see they finally learned that lesson, because they had not approached it that way for 3 years. But this year now they are now they're eligible, or now they finally figured it out. When we come back, quick word on Conor Timmins, who is also filing for arbitration. And kind of what the value might be there, what that contract might look like, and where the Sabres cap will be at the end of it. That when we come back here on Locked On Sabres. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by Monarch Money. If you ever wish that managing your money felt easier, well, with Monarch Money, you can. Whether you're growing your savings or you're planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money it's more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. If you right now, I'm somebody that's looking at investing and trying to learn more about this stuff. And really, I mean, when you're just learning about it, you want it made as easy as possible. And to me, as user-friendly as Monarch Money is, I wouldn't recommend anything else to anybody else. So if you ever wish you had all your accounts and spending in one place, keep track of it with your partner. It's just everything is made a lot easier. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. You could use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code locked on NHL for half off your first year. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. There's one more bit of RFA news to handle here. On our next show, I want to talk about a trade idea I have with Pittsburgh. Conor Timmins, who the Sabres acquired from Pittsburgh, filed for arbitration. Weird one, because Conor Timmins, 26 years old, restricted free agent, 6'2", offensive defenseman. Talked a little bit about him after the draft. I like this move. I think he's a better player than Connor Clifton, who they acquired for him. But what does he think he's going to get? What does he think he's going to get from an arbitrator? Last year, he set a career high with 15 points in 68 games. Now, he did have 10 points. Actually, if you combine the two previous seasons, Timmons in only 52 games had 24 points. That's better. That is more points per 60 minutes, more offense. And that's what he's more supposed to be as an offensive defenseman. But this was his first full season in the NHL at 26 years old. So what is he going to get? Couple of $1 million. Can't be much. I doubt it can be much at all. This is one where I would fully expect the Sabres and Timmins to come to an agreement before they get to arbitration. I just don't think the player is worth enough that you'd be penny pinching back and forth if you were unable to get a deal done. So looking at Timmins right now, his contract, I bet, comes in at about $1.5-2 million. That'd be my guess. When that happens, the Sabres will have about $11 million, 11.5-ish, maybe even as much as 12 left in cap space. That's where they'll be sitting. Now, after they sign Timmins, after they sign Levi, then maybe they're around 10. And then all that left is for your Byram trade or for your Byram contract. And you've got plenty of room to do that. One thing that I want to say about the Sabres right now, after these three deals end up being done, they are not alone in not spending to the cap this year. It's very strange to me to see how many teams are so far below the cap. And I think there's only one real explanation for that. It is teams, the cap went up, but teams didn't adjust their player valuation. And you have a lot of long-term contracts in the NHL. So when the cap goes up, it's very unlike the NFL. The NFL, where you can renegotiate at any time, you can get cut at any time. Where your long-term deals are really more like your 5-year deal in the NFL is really like a 2-year deal. It's very different. So when the cap goes up, those players have more leverage, have leverage at all to get out of their contract, renegotiate, demand more. They get a bigger piece of the pie. Here, all NHL players contracts are fully guaranteed, and they are locked in until you either get bought out or you retire. That's it. So you can't have Sidney Crosby renegotiating right now because the cap went up. You can't have, McDavid right now can get more money for next year, but he can't for this season. His cap hit is locked in for this season, no matter what. And to me, there just wasn't enough good players in free agency to fill in all that money. There is hundreds of millions of dollars, I believe, right now in the next 2 years of unspent cap dollars. Alan Walsh, Paterka's agent, was tweeting about this. And right now, $28 million in space for the Ducks, $23 million for the Sharks, $22 million for the Blackhawks, $19 million for the Jets, $16 million for the Blue Jackets, $15 million for Pittsburgh, $15 million for Calgary, $13 million for Buffalo, $12 million for Detroit, $11 million for Seattle, $10 million for Carolina. That's a Stanley Cup contender. They signed the biggest free agent in Nikolai Ehlers, still $10 million left over. Minnesota, $10 million. Nashville, $10 million. Utah, LA, New Jersey, all at $6 million. I mean, half the league is at $6 million or more in cap space. That's a good player that you're leaving on the table, but there's no player available like that. So really, at the end of it, I think this is going to be, I don't want to absolve them. This is not me absolving them of not spending, because to me it is unacceptable and it is unforgivable that the Buffalo Sabres in the last 5 years have left as many cap dollars on the table as they have. They would have broke the playoff drought, and they spent, it's like $50 million in unspent cap dollars. They would have made the playoffs if they had really leaned in and put the money into it. So I don't want to absolve them of that. I will say, though, at the end of this Byram situation, if they bring back a player of comparable value money-wise to Byram, or they just sign him and they go to arbitration, he gets $6 million. The Sabres are going to have less cap space than about half the league. Right now, if you say, let's say, I'll be conservative on these numbers. Let's go 1.5 for Timmons, $1 million for Levi. That's $2.5 million, brings you down to about 11. And then $6 million for Byram. $6 million, I think, is low for Byram. That would leave you with $5 million in space, which is less space than every team I just mentioned. Utah, LA, New Jersey, Nashville, Minnesota, Carolina, Seattle, Detroit, Calgary, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Winnipeg, Chicago, San Jose, and Anaheim. It's kind of weird that they're going to end up spending more money this year, get closer to the cap, and not really put in, to our eyes, much of an investment to get better. It depends what they get back for Byram. Maybe they won't get a player back of comparable value. The player that I mentioned from St. Louis that I'd like to see them acquire, Jake Neighbors. Jake Neighbors makes $3.75 million per year. Then you're sitting with $8 million, $9 million left, and you're right around where a lot of those other teams are. So their cap books are going to maybe be a little bit higher than I think most are expecting once we get resolution on a Byram trade. All right, next up on our show, I want to talk about the Penguins because I've got a trade idea that a buddy texted me about with Pittsburgh. And any trade ideas that you've got left out there, be sure to text them in, tweet them in. We'll have a bit of a mailbag show on our next episode. So come back for that and enjoy the good weather. And we'll talk next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL for all the insights on the new CBA that was signed. We'll talk about that on this show as well later in the week. But if you want full deep dive into the CBA, Locked On NHL's got you covered. You can check them out wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you next time here on Locked On Sabres, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.